headquarters are at the Murphy Smith Bungalow down between Wells Fargo and Whole Foods on Ocean Avenue, the little house built in the 20s. So we're all volunteer, we're nonprofit, but part of what we do is a historic program for years. They're on a YouTube channel, and they're the Laguna Beach Historical Society. Our program coordinator, Jane Petty Jans, is here, and Johanna Ellis, and there's lots of board members here, and we're so happy to have you. It's about 2 years post-pandemic, and everything is open, it feels like. Now we are competing for way too much to do in Laguna Beach, right? You go to Sunset Serenades, you go to the Caribbean, you can go to, the arts and cultural, Honk is playing. So for you to be here tonight is wonderful. A lot of you supporting our speaker, but also just a lot of people coming from our promotion of the program, and we know there's so much to do here. So thank you so much. We have some memberships, things if you'd like to give $25 per year. We send our newsletter, we have tote bags, and we have some t-shirts out front, and those help us keep the lights on those memberships. Next month is Heritage Month, Laguna Beach's Heritage Month, May, through the city. And we're going to host on May 18th, a Saturday, something for families. It's going to be a living history with characters from Laguna that are famous, Jack Norworth and others, and it's going to be in partnership with No Square Theater. So they're going to be at the bungalow performing history for families and kids, and that'll be May 18th, Saturday, 10 to 1. So stop by, and we'll put that in the paper also, but that's in our contribution to Heritage Month in May. So we have Gaylen Corbett, right? Yeah, here today as our speaker, who has a unique story to tell about her father, David Solomon, who was a wonderful watercolor artist, but also remember the history of Laguna and the disappearing history of Laguna and its surroundings. The title is Lost Horizons, Historical Paintings by David Solomon, and we can never learn enough about our history. And so we're happy and grateful to have Gaylen tonight to speak about that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I am just so excited to share this with you. So, my father, David Solomon, is a watercolorist who has lived and worked here in Laguna Beach for over 50 years. There he is right there, and hard at work on the beach there. And he's here with us tonight. He still lives here in North Laguna, although he is retired, pretty much retired from painting. And he's here with his lovely wife, Penny, and my sister, April. So I know for a fact that you've all seen at least one of his contributions to our town, because you're in the city limits. And his artwork adorns the 3 signs at the entrances to the city. And that is the seal for the Chamber of Commerce, which is, it might be one of those things that you drive by and you don't think too much about, but it is a piece of art that he designed back in the 1970s. And it was basically a community service project. This is the original artwork for it. It has his hand-painted brush strokes and even some correction fluid on there. He has used a variety of symbols to depict our town. Poseidon with his trident representing the sea, the Greek god of the sea. And to represent the performing arts, he has the theater masks and a ballerina right here. Of course, the visual arts and the sun for our wonderful weather. And he makes sure to point the sign out every time we drive by it. So he's proud of it, and our family is very proud of his art. So I'll start by just giving you a little bit of background about David Solomon, and then I'll go into how this presentation came about, and then we'll get into the real historical paintings. So David Solomon was born in 1943 in East LA. He grew up there in the Mexican-American community, in the barrio, as he calls it. This is a painting that he did. This painting is called Corner Light, and he painted this in 1976. It's owned by the National Watercolor Society, which is a great honor for watercolors to have their work in that collection. And so he graduated from Garfield High School, and from there he went on to Art Center College of Design, which at that time was located in Los Angeles, and he graduated with a degree in product design. It was that degree with that art and design background that literally saved his life, because in 1968 he was drafted to go to Vietnam, and so he went to basic training. And after basic training, when the Army learned of his education and his design background, instead of sending him overseas to fight, they sent him to Washington, D.C. And he served in the Army's Design and Exhibit Unit, and they did a variety of things. In this photo, he is designing the scale model of a traveling exhibit that traveled around the country on the back of a flatbed trailer, and it was used to educate the public about the United States Air Missile Defense Program. So once he was done with his service, he and my mother moved back to Los Angeles, and the smog was extremely thick in those days. And so in a desperate attempt to escape the smog, they drove down the coast and discovered Laguna Beach. And it was love at first sight. So they quickly got a VA loan and purchased a home at top of the world for around $20,000. A nice single-family home back in those days. This painting is called Lagtown, painted in 1982. This was done from the rooftop of the building that sits at the corner of Laguna Avenue and Glenary. And I actually got to go up there with him when he was painting. He would go back every day at the same time of day to capture the lighting at that time. And he actually painted this view quite a few times, but this is the biggest version of it. And so once David had moved to Laguna Beach, he very quickly shifted from his planned career in product design to a career in fine art. And he began going around to the local galleries, meeting artists. He started showing his work at the Showcase Gallery, which was on the corner of Mountain and PCH, and also the Backdoor Gallery that was right there. He, in 1972, was juried into the Festival of Arts, where he had a long and successful career. He showed his work there for over 35 years. And in 1980, he was the first artist who had ever been commissioned to create a painting especially for use in the Pageant of the Masters. And they gave him the theme of Greek mythology, which was not his usual type of art. So he traveled to Greece and came home with the inspiration to paint Icarus, which the Greek myth tells the tale of Icarus building wings and using beeswax to hold them together when he was trying to escape the clutches of a giant bird. And he flew too close to the sun and fell to the bottom of the ocean. And so this was a real challenge for Mr. Solomon to create the composition. It took many, many months for him to come up with this. And finally, he arrived at the final design titled The Ecstasy of Icarus. It was featured in the 1980 Pageant of the Masters. And here's a photo of him painting that backdrop. You can just make out the whale tail there in the background. I was 7 years old when this happened, and I remember getting to go backstage and see that giant backdrop. It was quite a sight and quite a huge undertaking. It makes me admire the artists that do that now. And so he's had a long and successful career. His list of awards, achievements, exhibitions, etc. is just, it goes on for days and days. One of the highlights, though, is that when Laguna Plein Air Painters Association was formed in the 1990s, he was one of the first artists named as a signature member, and that really recognizes him as one of the godfathers of the plein air movement, of the plein air renaissance that really took hold in the 1990s. And in this picture, he's receiving an award for the painting in the middle, which is titled Poplar Alley. It's a lovely sunset piece of the alley behind his house. And so, since he's had such a long and interesting life, I ended up writing a book about him and publishing it in 2019. This is David and April at the book signing that we had at Forest and Ocean Gallery. It was a blast. And the way that came about, basically 3 things kind of happened at once. So Penny and my dad had his archives, which consist of paintings, prints, photographs, slides, art show invitations. They had it all neatly organized in their garage. And so a lot of times when I would stop by to visit, my dad might be messing around out there, and I would start looking through the drawers and looking at the old photographs and just kind of looking back at his history. And then at that same time, my daughter Haley was a teenager, and she was working at the Sawdust Festival in the information booth. And so I would drive her to work and usually come in and walk around for an hour or so. And I would always stop at Michael Hallidan's booth. And Mike Hallidan was one of the artists that my dad had painted with for many years, but especially when I was younger, when I was little, he was always around the studio. They were going out to paint. And Mike was so funny. He would always have some hilarious story to tell me when I stopped by. Like just on the tip of his tongue, he would just rattle off some tale of their travels or their art shows together or whatever. And one of the times I stopped by, he said, somebody should probably write this stuff down. And so that planted the seed. And also at that time, this was around 2016, David, my father, was having trouble with his speech. And the doctors really didn't have any answer about what was going on. It was clearly getting worse. And so I figured Mike Hallidan was right, that somebody should write it down. And so I started interviewing him and also interviewing all of the Laguna Beach artists that I could get a hold of. Unfortunately, some of the ones who I really wanted to interview had already passed away, namely Michael Logan, Patrick Tobin, and Terry Thornsley would have had a lot to say about his story. But Mike Hallidan filled in a lot of the blanks, as did other artists, and so it culminated in the publishing of this book. And so in the process of writing the book, I started going through the archives, and I picked about 100 photos to put in the book to help tell the story of his life and career. But a couple years after the book was published, in 2021, I went back to the archive, and I just started looking through it. And there is so much. There's 2 binders of slides back there, and just in those binders alone, there's hundreds of paintings. And so I ended up buying a slide scanner right here, and decided to scan all of the slides of his paintings that I could find. And then that led to scanning all the photographs, finding images on CD-ROMs, and scanning negatives and transparencies. So by the time I got to around 800 paintings, 800 paintings, and I'm not even done. But by the time I got there, I really had a much deeper understanding of his work. Even more so than when I wrote the book 2 years before. I could really see the trajectory of his work, the different themes, styles, the places he painted, the years that he painted them, and really the common thread within all of his work for 50 years has been a desire to preserve the history of our local area. And so that's when I reached out to the Historical Society, and they were so nice to welcome us here tonight. So we are very fortunate as a community to have so many painters who are depicting our local scenery, and just by the nature of their work, they are capturing moments in time. They're capturing history and painting these places as they look in the present moment. And David's work is the same, so it might be just capturing a perfect day at the beach. And this is David at work here with his paper laying on the ground. That's a typical way that he would paint. It's kind of unusual. Or it might be a simple painting of a local eatery. And of course, this was in 2009. He didn't know then that Taco Loco would someday be gone. But simple little watercolor there. Or a rainy night on Forest Avenue. And yeah, wow, this is one of my favorite paintings. I love it because it was painted the year that there was a huge storm on Hospitality Night. And I was in middle school. I was running around downtown with my girlfriends, and we were trying to find hot chocolate and candy canes and stuff. And just as we started around the corner here, the skies opened up and it just started dumping rain. And we came around the corner here and like a huge just gush of water hit us. We were soaked and a big branch fell off of the eucalyptus tree there. So, he didn't necessarily paint it on that night, but, a painting like this can just remind you of a certain moment in time. And then there's some paintings that have sort of a hidden history to them that only the artist might know. And this one is a painting of Main Beach, just north of the playground. It's where the Marlon Bartel's table and chairs has been for many years now. This was before that installation. And as you can see, these 3 trees here are terribly overgrown. They're so overgrown that the canopies are all tangled together. And the people sitting here, I know one of them is Michael Logan, I can tell by his beard. David Solomon and Michael Logan had a studio at that time that was located just upstairs from the Jolly Roger. So right downtown, they were always down at Main Beach getting lunch or whatever. And they happened to be there one day when the police showed up because somebody was living in those trees. And he told me that the authorities showed up and they were pulling down like an entire furniture set. Dresser, sofa, and everything. And so that's the kind of history that, you wouldn't know unless the artist actually told you. And but as time went by, David shifted to focusing more on intentionally capturing our local history. And so here we go. So this was a quote from Orange County Illustrated, a magazine in 1979. The journalist wrote, "Solomon wants to say what he finds visually appealing, capturing Orange County's natural settings that are falling in the path of progress." That's what this is all about. So this is a painting. When I first saw this, I thought it's Laguna lumber. But I didn't really have proof of that because the archive is almost entirely photographic. There's no written records to go with it, except for the occasional note written on a slide, or the title of the painting. In this case, this one is titled "Lunch!" Which just indicates why there's no one working here. But it didn't tell me for sure that it was Laguna lumber. And so after going through the archive a couple times, I resorted to a Google search and I came across this, which is a book, Laguna Beach Lumber Company History by Jeffrey Jairus. And Jeff is the grandson of the man who founded Laguna Lumber in 1913. And it was Laguna Lumber from 1913 to 2001 when it became Ganal Lumber. And so here we have a David Solomon painting on the cover of that book. It's a painting that was not in the archive. And I come across paintings like that all the time. People will send them to me, and it's like one I've never seen out of 800 paintings. So I was really happy to see this. It also confirmed that the other painting is indeed Laguna lumber. And as you can see, this one's titled Lumber Laborer. So we have a figure here. There's a figure off in the distance. And so here's one of the reference photos that is in David's archive, taken at Laguna Lumber. And here's another one. This is when Laguna Lumber was located downtown. So it's when it was between Forest Avenue and Ocean Avenue. And if you look closely, you can see in the background, this is a building that's actually on 3rd Street. This building here is 465 Forest Avenue, which is that 3-story building just about at Forest and 3rd. And so that just verified it is indeed Laguna Lumber. And then just going back to the painting so you can see how he was just inspired by that scene. And then I just thought, I was looking for just a little bit more history, maybe one more picture of Laguna Lumber, and I did a last-minute search. And I came across this on LagunaBeachIndy.com. I can't tell you how blown away I was to see this, because first of all, I had never seen the old lumberyard from this perspective. Secondly, it's in the middle of being demolished. The city had realized by the 1970s, as town was getting more and more crowded, that it was just not going to be practical to have a busy lumberyard in the heart of downtown with trucks coming and going all day long. And so they facilitated the move from downtown out to the canyon. And so this was in the middle of that move, of that process, which took a couple years, like I think 1974 to 75. LagunaBeachIndy.com has a great article about it. But what really blew me away about this is this car right here. This is a burnt orange Datsun station wagon, which is the car that David Solomon owned at that time. And he bought it from my grandparents for $1. So I can't prove that that's his car, but I'd say there's a pretty good chance that that happens to be his car. So, and as I've gone through this process of researching each painting, stuff like this happens all the time. And so that's why when I saw this, I was like blown away, but also at the same time, I've realized these little miracles kind of happen along the way when you're doing this kind of historical research. So moving on, this is another moment in history. This is the construction of Aliso Pier. And this painting was originally purchased by our dear Rick Balzer. It is titled Up Aliso Creek. And you can see the construction equipment there. There's a crane on the left side. And if you look in the background now, you'll notice the bluff, which does not have the Gucci mansion on it. It was before the construction of that giant house. So just another little moment. Now, we're gonna move to the outskirts of town. This is somewhere in Newport Coast. Those are the cliffs of El Morro and Irvine Cove in the background. You can see the coastal hills going up. I'm sorry to say I don't know anything about this house, but I do know that David painted it twice, and it is Crystal Cove Ridge. This painting was done in 1981. And even though there's not a lot of information here, I included it just because it shows a clear representation of how much of a buffer Laguna Beach used to have. We used to have this huge expanse of open space around us because we were surrounded by ranches. There was Irvine Ranch, which went from the mountains to the sea. It was 110,000 acres, which is just an unfathomable amount of land. There was also Moulton Ranch, which was 22,000 acres. It ran along behind Top of the World in Arch Beach Heights. That's why we have Moulton Meadows Park, because that had been Moulton Ranch land down below there. And there were Rancho Niguel, Rancho Mission Viejo. So we had just all of this open space. And that really insulated the town much more than it is now. We're fortunate to still have the canyon, but really, I feel like Laguna looks a lot the same, but you can just feel the outside world kind of closing in. But back then, we had a lot of breathing room. Okay, so as I mentioned, my parents purchased a house at Top of the World. They actually bought and sold a couple of houses up there. This is the second one, which was located on Bond Drive. And it had just a panoramic view of the entire Saddleback Valley. This picture doesn't really do it justice. We could see from like Irvine out to Mission Viejo to Saddleback down to what's now Monarch Beach and San Juan. It was just an incredible view. And as you can see back in those days, there was a lot of open hills. The development in the distance is El Toro and Mission Viejo, which was just starting to be built. But all of these hills were just still open. And just to give you a point of reference, that the hilltop here, I believe this is Soka University, and that's all Aliso Viejo now. Yeah. So it has changed quite a bit. Thankfully, the canyon down here is still preserved. And so David and his friends like to get out into the hills and paint the landscape. And this was at a time when plein air painting was not a big thing. People didn't even use the term plein air. David would refer to it as painting on location, like how a film crew films on location. He was always painting on location. And so there was really David and a small group of painters who sort of resurrected that early California tradition of plein air painting. And they were I think David felt like they were kind of going rogue. They were breaking the rules a little bit because other artists just weren't doing this at this time. So this is a painting, a photograph that David took. It's Michael Logan here at the easel. He's actually doing a painting of Bill Ogden, who is doing a painting of the vast landscape that you can see from top of the world. And Patrick Tobin is another artist that they painted with a lot, and of course Mike Hallinan, as I mentioned, back in those early days. So here's one of David's paintings, inspired by that location. This is a very large piece. I believe it's at the La Costa Resort and Hotel. And we could see beautiful sunsets from up there, top of the world, every day. So here they are hiking out. And when they would go down into these canyons, as I mentioned, Molten Ranch was down there. It was still occupying all of that land below top of the world. And so they would come across old buildings down there. And a lot of artists were like the early California plein air painters who were focused on capturing light and color of the landscape. But David really liked painting old buildings. He liked buildings with some history and some character to them. He liked to create a sense of nostalgia in his work. And this one is the earliest piece that I would say connects to this theme of preserving history. This is from around 1972, and these buildings were somewhere down in that landscape below top of the world. And then here's a more defined location. This is on Molten Ranch. It's a study, which means it's an unfinished painting. It's basically just a practice where the artist is just trying to work out the composition, the color, and exactly what they're going to paint. And he had it noted as a study for Molten Morning. So there's a painting somewhere titled Molten Morning. I've looked all through the archive and cannot find it anywhere. I did find this one. This is titled Workday. It's the same collection of buildings. These are Molten Ranch buildings, some of the main ranch operations. It doesn't look, in this painting, it really doesn't look like the ranch is in use. All the doors are closed, there's no people or animals or anything. But it is a nice painting that captures the color and the light and the shadow there. So I've continued to look for Molten Morning. I actually had a really nice meeting with the director of Molten Museum, and they're wonderful people down there. If you have not been to Molten Museum, it's a small museum that is down by La Paz on the freeway, right near Nellie Gale Ranch, and they've done a lovely job of preserving our local history. They have just some wonderful displays, and you do have to make an appointment to go, but I highly recommend it. And so after I met with them, it's funny how things happen, because I stopped by my parents' house just to tell them about the meeting and let them know that how great it was. And I took a closer look at this photo. This photo has been framed and in my house since I can remember, in my parents' house, since 1977. It was taken by Southwest Art Magazine when they visited David's studio and wrote up a lovely article about him and included some photographs in the magazine. And I took a closer look at this, and I realized that this painting this photo that I've seen thousands of times is actually the painting he's working on is Molten Morning. And when I realized that, I mean, it just, I was shocked, because I just looked past this photo for so long. And so I took that photo into Photoshop and kind of twisted it around and tried to get it in some sort of upright position to give me an idea of what it looks like. It's just slightly different than Workday, the previous one. I can see that the barn door is open down there. There's an open window down here. The way the wash is laid down in the foreground is a little bit different. So that painting is out there. If you're ever at a garage sale, you see a painting like this, please buy it. It's probably still local, It's out there somewhere, and I will find it eventually. Here's one of the reference photos that David took at this time. This was in 1974. And there are some horses in this photo. There's a vehicle back there. So there was some kind of activity, but clearly it was not the full ranch activities that would have gone on in earlier years. It's hard to reconcile where this is, because this is Aliso Viejo. It is solid houses, townhouses, condos, schools. The creek is still preserved. This is Aliso Creek, so this winds through Aliso Viejo, what's now Aliso Viejo, and comes out at Aliso Beach here in Laguna. I think it's important for people to know what it used to look like, especially young people. I work at a school that's just down the creek from here, and the kids really don't realize that this was, to me, this was 50 years ago, but to them that's more than a lifetime, but it's not that distant of a history. And so it's important for them to know what it used to look like so that they know how important it is to save the open spaces that we still have. And so as I've gone through the archive, I've seen many, many, many paintings of barns. And, as I've gone through the catalog, if something doesn't have a title or a label, then I kind of just give it a generic label. This was like an old barn. And I went on to the next one. This one I just labeled as a rustic building with a broken fence. But as I become more familiar with his collection of paintings and all the places he painted, and also the certain years of things, I become familiar with the topography of those places. So David painted in the Rocky Mountains, in the Sierra Nevadas, in New Mexico, in Arizona, all over the United States. And I realized these hills in the background are not the Rockies or the Sierra Nevadas. So I put these together, I realized this was once one piece of paper, and those are our local hills. I can match up that ridgeline with old photographs of this area. So this is the area just out the canyon, down in the hills, like below Top of the World or Laguna Woods now. And so I took these images and showed them to Moulton Museum, and was very happy when they told me, we do think those are Moulton Ranch buildings, and we think that some of them have been preserved, which I was shocked. I didn't know that any of the buildings from the ranch had been preserved. And so they directed me to Aliso Viejo Ranch. Now I'm not certain if it's the same barn, because there were other barns and his painting had a little bit of a different roof line. But that barn has been recreated at what's now Aliso Viejo Ranch. But these buildings, I'm very confident, are the ones in that painting. This is what they call the tin shed, and this is the foreman's house here. And so it was just really nice to know that somebody cared enough to salvage those buildings and put them back together and make them a place where school children can go visit, people interested in local history can visit, and you can also have wonderful events there. Our school just had a great school auction fundraiser at the Aliso Viejo Ranch. It's funny getting to it because you drive through a sea of houses and then all of a sudden you're at these little ranch buildings. It's just kind of tucked away. Okay, so if you'll allow me to take you a little bit farther away from Laguna for just a few slides. This is an important piece. It's one of the central pieces to this entire collection. And this is titled Lost Horizon. It is the Sakioka family farm, painted in 1983. This is in Costa Mesa, near the 5 and 55. The Sakioka family was a Japanese-American family. Mr. Sakioka had immigrated here in the early 1900s, and the family ended up owning over 1,000 acres of farmland in Orange County. And so this particular farm is what they called the home farm. It's where they lived. It was over 400 acres. I'm very happy to say that Mrs. Sakioka is here tonight, and I'm just honored that she came to see. And so the story of this painting. So as David drove around Orange County, he would look for these places that he felt were, as they said, in the path of progress, where the development was closing in on them. And this is one of those farms that he would talk about. He would drive by and look at it. If I was in the car with him, he would point to it. And so he cared about this farm, and he was worried that it was going to be gone. And so eventually he did a couple of paintings of it. This is a very large painting. It's 40 by 60, and it's really beautiful in person. I remember in 1985 he had a show at the Marriott Hotel in Newport Beach, and I was 12 years old, But I do remember being there, and I remember the Sakioka family coming and purchasing the painting. Mr. Sakioka was a very generous benefactor to the community, but he was also a very practical man. And from what Phyllis told me, he didn't go around spending money on art, but she insisted that the family should have this painting, and so he made a fair offer, and Mr. Solomon accepted, and so it's still in their collection, which is very, very happy. And as you can see, if we think back, I think now people are coming to realize how important it is to be able to grow produce locally with the farm-to-table movement, and how important that is for a community. But you can see how much farmland we've lost. So most of this land has been developed, all except about 20 acres or so, which here's David and Phyllis in 2021. She was nice enough to have us over so we could see the painting once again. And that last 20 acres has been leased by the Tanaka family, who also has Tanaka farms. The Tanakas have turned it into flower fields that are open to the public, which is a lovely use of that acreage. And so another Japanese-American family is the Kinoshita family. This was titled San Juan Capistrano Farm, painted in 1980 by David Solomon. And this was another one of those places where he felt like urban living was closing in on this little tiny family farm. But fortunately, as many of you probably know, that farm is still there. It is now the ecology center. The farmhouse has been beautifully restored, and South Coast Farm grows some wonderful organic produce. And I live right down the street from there. Okay, so we're heading back towards Laguna. We'll get there pretty soon, but we're going to pass through Irvine. So this is the Irvine Granary, a photo taken by David Solomon in 1980. And as I mentioned, Irvine Ranch was 110,000 acres. They raised cattle, they grew a variety of different kinds of produce. And this building here, the granary, was sort of the hub of their agricultural operations. And as you can see, in 1980, it was still in use, although I think it was sort of on the decline at that time. David loved painting this building. He painted it over and over again. And the building's located at Sand Canyon and the 405 freeway. So you can see why he was concerned, because Irvine development's closing in, and you've got the freeway right there, so it was like only a matter of time before it was permanently changed. And so he would go back over and over again and paint it. Here he is in action in the 1970s. Some of these structures behind him are actually still there on the property. They have a little miniature historic district right at Sand Canyon and the 405 that you can visit. And so here's one of those paintings. This was Granary Days, done in 1979. And I can tell by looking at the paintings that he really loved the industrial nature of these buildings. They have these big, long scaffoldings and chutes where they would process all the soybeans and lima beans and other produce that they grew and prepare them for shipment and transportation to the stores. And here's another one. This one's titled Tin Towers. This is actually, it's always a play on words with his titles. This one's actually on eBay. It's offered by a private seller. We're kind of in this time period where a lot of the original buyers of David's paintings have handed their art collections down to their heirs, and so as people inherit them, once in a while they will turn up on eBay. It's not affiliated with the family, with our family at all. So I can see why he loved painting this building. I mean, with all the rust and the tin and the texture and everything, I can just see why he enjoyed painting that building so much. Here's another painting of it with the buyer, and I know she's the buyer because it's not an iPhone in her hand. This is 1976. She's holding her checkbook, ready to buy this lovely painting of the granary. And here's a close-up of the one that she purchased. We don't have any records of who bought what paintings, but once in a while we'll get a photo like that. And then here's a photo of what it looks like now. So this is now the La Quinta Inn. Part of it is hotel, and part of it is mixed use for offices and other businesses there, so you can stop by and check it out. You can even stay in the hotel, in the granary if you want to. So this is 20 years after that last painting was done. I can see that David drove all the way out there to visit his favorite building and do a painting. But when he got there, he found this big crane sitting on the property, and I'm sure he was not happy about it because he titled it Red Devil. So you can guess what happens next. If you go there today, you'll see that that farm there is now a parking lot. So that's just the way it goes, but I'm thankful that he did so many paintings of that area. Okay, here we are back down to 133. This is a photo that David took of Laguna Canyon in 1979. Back in those days, there was no public access to the canyon that I'm aware of. It was all barbed wire, and so you couldn't hike out the trails like you can now. We are so lucky to be able to access that canyon and enjoy it on our walks. And so David loved driving through the canyon, even though you couldn't get out there and hike, unless you climbed through the barbed wire, which obviously he did to take this picture. This is up on the hill at the corner of El Toro and the 133. Yeah, so he just loved driving the canyon, and that was back when it was just a 2-lane highway, and it just, even though it was terribly dangerous and built through the middle of wetlands, it was a lovely drive. And just that feeling of when you would get off the 405, off the freeway, and just drop down into that country road, it just, it was magical. And I know that he loved it. He would talk about it, and he would paint it. And here's a painting that he did in 1979. It's probably from that series of photos that he took. And from that same article that I quoted earlier, the author quoted David as saying, "I worry about things that are disappearing, like Laguna Canyon Road. It will soon be a 4-lane thoroughfare and lose its charm." And that was in 1979. So he was worried about that road changing way back then, long before it was the toll road went through or anything. And I have a feeling this is part of why. So here's David. As I mentioned, he often would put his substrate on the ground. And that's partly because he's a watercolorist, and when you paint in watercolor, you want it to be flat so the paint doesn't run. But even when he would paint with acrylic or oil, like he's doing here, he would often just put his painting right on the ground. I think he liked to travel light, for one thing, but also it's when you paint like this, and I don't know anyone else who paints like this, for one thing, except for maybe me and my sister, because we grew up watching him and copying him. And so we know from personal experience that when you work like this, kneeling on the ground, you're hyper connected to the environment. You can feel the coolness of the earth and the dampness of the grass underneath your knees. You can hear the crunch of the sycamore leaves, and you'll have like a little caterpillar run across your paper. You're just, even more than when you're standing in an easel or when you're hiking, like when you're here, you're just still and silent, and you are totally grounded to the environment. And so I think that's partly why he loved it so much, or maybe it's the other way around. But of course, when the canyon was threatened with development, David was a big supporter of the Save Laguna Canyon movement. Our family did the walk to save the canyon in 1989 together, and that was quite a time. It's funny, I woke up in the middle of the night last night, and I suddenly relived the feeling of being here and realizing how connected we all were, and how it was just a moment in time when we were all on the same page and we all wanted the same thing, which was just to save the canyon. And so, of course, thankfully, we were successful in stopping the Irvine Company's housing project that it had planned to build 2,500 homes through the canyon. But with that was the concession of the toll road going through. And we followed the story in the local newspapers as there were court battles going back and forth, injunctions, and it was just a constant worry and concern of what's going to happen. Nobody knew what was going to happen, if it was going to be built or not, if they were going to be able to stop it or not. And so my dad and I just decided we would just start painting it. And we just made it a goal to start getting out there and painting whenever we could get together and do that. And so we painted at the location where the toll road was planned to cross Laguna Canyon Road. And this is a painting that he did during that time. It's me sitting there in the grass painting. I didn't see this painting until 20 years after it was painted. I never saw it. But he was cleaning out his studio one day, and he pulled it out. It was an unstretched canvas, just rolled up, and he just gave it to me. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh, it just brought back those memories of just sitting there in the grass in front of the sycamores. And this process of painting the canyon at that time for us was it was just a therapeutic process. It was the desire to document the canyon and how it looked at that time before it was changed. We weren't trying to make paintings that we were going to frame and sell. It was just purely for our personal, peace of mind that we were going to make an effort to paint it. So we were there the day that construction started. We knew that it was going to start, but everyone that was there on the site, and we were at this little staging area off to the side here that the developers had cleared to bring in their equipment. It was before this bridge was there or anything. It was just still the canyon with a little staging area. And everyone was just waiting for that last injunction, that last judgment to come down to halt the construction. But of course it didn't happen. And so the bulldozers fired up and started trying to grade the hillside. There was somebody chained to a tree. That person was eventually taken away, and they started tearing up that hillside. And I just remember being there. David and I were just right by the road, and all the demonstrators and the construction equipment was up against the hillside. But the dirt was like this dark brown earth. It was just like virgin brown, And so it was just a really emotional scene. After that day, I did not return to that site and paint anymore. But David kept going back. And I think it was part of the process for him of acceptance. That this is reality, this is happening. And so he continued to document it. And so this is the first painting in the series. You can see this is a temporary bridge that they've constructed, and they have an access road off there in the distance. And then this next one, they're a little bit further along. He's pushed out a little bit further from where he was originally. They've got the pylons built, the cranes are all working, and it's just happening, and he's just continuing to process it. As I thought back on this, I realized, and also from doing some research and reading the old newspaper articles about this time, I realized that he was not supposed to be there. They were arresting people who showed up on the job site because there had been threats, and they were worried about the safety of the workers, of the project, etc. And so I thought, how did he get away with sitting there and painting? And then I remembered that he had a hard hat that he would keep in the back of his car, that he had been given up for another project he was doing. And so I don't know for sure, but I suspect he probably just put that hard hat on and sat there and painted. He was used to, and he had been used to evading the Irvine Ranch before the toll road came along. He would go through the barbed wire and go out into the hills and paint. And he would always have one eye out for the Irvine horseback patrol. They would patrol that land on horseback. And so when I would go with him, he would tell me, keep your eye out. Yeah, you remember? So here's another one. This painting's here tonight. This is not a great photo, but you can see the painting in person. It's right at the back of the room there. And then this is a more finished piece, a little bit closer to the construction. There's still earth movers going across the bridge there and all the construction debris. Now, here's what it looks like now. Of course, we've all driven that road many times. The good news in all this is the sycamores there off on the left are the same sycamores that I was sitting in front of in that painting, and so they survived, thank goodness. And I'm so thankful that the rest of the canyon is still intact and that we don't have a sea of houses out there. And so one toll road leads to another toll road. And so we had the 73, of course, go through Laguna Canyon, and that was followed by the 241. And the 261, the latest extension of it, comes out near Ortega Highway. And so in 2018, the Rancho Mission Viejo Company had decided to develop that land into some huge housing developments and shopping centers, etc. They're working on a bridge going down there. But they invited a group of 5 Laguna Beach artists to go out and paint the land before it was developed. And so David was one of those artists. He got to go out there and paint. And this is what he came back with. It's a mixed media piece with watercolor and pastel. And Penny told me that the developer had offered to purchase this painting. It's a nice large painting. We have it here this evening. And of course, it's always nice to sell a painting, especially a big one. But the developer wanted him to change it to make it look flat here, like you could build a house there. And he politely declined. If I know my dad, he probably was thinking, no way, Jose, I'm not changing this painting. And I'm so glad he didn't, because it documents what it looked like then. And now the progress is coming along. There's houses. This is all houses right here. And they're just, it's only a matter of time. But that's the way it goes. And as I bring this to a close, I will say that I appreciate the fact that the Rancho Mission Viejo Company realized that plein air painters bring something special to the table, that they bring more than just what a photograph can show. They bring their emotions when they are painting the land. They put into their work their heart and soul, and the feeling of why this land is important and why this place is beautiful and why it should be preserved. So I'm very thankful for that. So David does manage to paint a little bit. It's very difficult for him nowadays, and but fortunately April has been able to work her magic and get him to pick up a brush once in a while. So we're very grateful for that. So all of the paintings that you've seen here tonight, and over 800 more of them, can be found on his website, davidsolomonartist.com. If you click on catalog, you'll see an introduction to the catalog Resine, which is a living catalog, which means that I'm constantly adding to it whenever I find new paintings. And so if you click on that, you will find the entire database of paintings. You can view them chronologically, or you can use the search feature at the top right. You can put in the title, the location, or the subject matter, and you should be able to find what you're looking for. So you should put in Woods Cove or Forest Avenue, or East LA, and you can see that variety of paintings there. So I really hope that the public will access that. It's there as a community service. The paintings are all sold or in the family collection, and so we don't have anything for sale really, but they're there for you to enjoy. And you can also order the book. So the book that I wrote about him is a more detailed story about his life, his travels, his background. It's full of his art, including many paintings of Laguna Beach.
I have my copy and the autograph.
So we thank you so much for being here tonight from the bottom of my heart and our family. We just can't thank you enough.